Okay. Good evening. Yes. Welcome to another evening of spiritual warriorship. Discussions from His Holiness Bhaktitirtha Swami Spiritual Warrior Books. My name is Mother Indrani, and I'm here humbly endeavoring to serve you and present the concepts of spiritual warriorship through these books, which are very exciting. I found them very exhilarating. Spiritual Warriors 6 discusses the beyond fanaticism, terrorism, and war. Discover the peace solution, which sounds wonderful. So I welcome you all and hope that you've been getting, those who have come regularly, you've been getting something that you can apply in your everyday life and seeing yourself grow and become a stronger spiritual warrior. Tonight, before I begin, I know all of us, I imagine, out there, and myself, have been confounded by the devastation in Haiti, by the earthquake. Quite a sight. I saw some pictures tonight. I don't watch the TV, which I imagine for those who have that great big screen TV, to see that, it must be really heart-rendering. But someone brought my attention to meditation by Bhaktitirtha Swami in one of his beggar books. And he has 4 beggar books, by the way, of meditation and prayers that are absolutely fantastic. But I want to share this one with you tonight before we get into our spiritual warriorship. And it's meditation 4 from beggar number 1, which are meditations and prayers on the Supreme Lord. And this meditation is called, Dear Lord, Where Were You? Because what happened as I was looking at the pictures, there's a way people make comments, and some of the comments were really sad, and how people are trying to figure out what happened and put the blame on something or someone. So let's listen to what His Holiness Bhaktitirtha Swami is saying. Dear Lord, where were you? Because I imagine many people are asking that question. There was a Holocaust where over 6 million people were massacred. Innocent men, helpless women, loving children. Many who died hated you. Some ignored you. Others prayed to you. For the first time in their lives, some turned to you in distress. There were others who had made a daily practice of intensely calling on your name. However, they were all slaughtered during Hitler's regime. Dear Lord, where were you? Some people were on their knees praying before they slept. Some were at the dinner table asking for your blessings. Some were being trained to serve you as teachers or preachers. Others were simply moving about, madly engaged in all types of sense gratification. All of them, those who worshipped you, those who tried to avoid you, were bombarded at Hiroshima. Dear Lord, where were you? There were millions of babies with swollen stomachs, their mothers and fathers weak, so weak that if someone gave them a shovel to work for food, they would still starve because they had not the strength to do anything. These children, women, and men all died of starvation in Ethiopia. Dear Lord, where were you? People thought the world was ending. Everyone knew many people who had died. Death was in every family. There was great difficulty in discarding all the corpses. In 14th century Europe at the time, the Black Plague, over 1/3 of the people on the planet died. Dear Lord, where were you? They were living communally in peace, kind to nature. They were friends to the animals and respectful to the demigods. There were more than 10 million strong, and although they live in the richest country, they are some of the poorest and most maltreated people. Robbed of their land, massacred, and put on reservations, they were slowly dying off, dwindling in number. Their future does not look much better, as they have the highest child mortality rate in the developed world. These millions of Indians who call to you as they put on their war paint to defend themselves lost their lives, their land, and their future. Dear Lord, where were you? Thousands of innocent people died. Many will die tomorrow or the next day or next week. Many who did not die immediately have wished or will wish they did, as they still suffer tremendously for the rest of their lives. Those poor people in India who died in the chemical disaster at Bhopal. Some of them were visiting the temple every day. Many were expert at praying for protection. However, neither they nor their loved ones were protected. Dear Lord, where were you? Over 90 million were taken from their families, chained like animals and forced on boats, where most died in transit. Those who did not die on the boats would later wish they had, as they would never again see their families or country. Their wives were at the will of the slave masters, and their children would grow up in an atmosphere of hate, angry with the world, having little awareness of their heritage, and seemingly freed from their slavery. They remain second-class citizens in a country made rich from their bondage. These slaves kidnapped from Africa were praying before being captured, as they were sold and as they died. Dear Lord, where were you? 640 million people fought for 18 days under your order. Except for 5 people, every single person was killed. Friends fought against friends. Students fought teachers. Relatives looked in each other's eyes as they struck death blows. This battle of Kurukshetra was even considered to be a religious war. And dear Lord, you were there. You have said, one who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. This is Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4, text 9. You have explained how this material world is a place of repeated birth and death, and no place for a gentleman. There are always massive miseries, and the suffering is always intense. We are given free will by which to elevate ourselves and others, or to degrade ourselves and inflict cruelty on mankind. My dear Lord, the pain and suffering of man's inhumanity to man in this world are devastating. There's no love, happiness, or security outside of you. Those who are truly surrendered to you know nothing but you, and you know nothing but them. You are always around, accessible, and ready to bring us out of this world of such gross miseries and limitations. Please snatch me up and allow me to be a true transcendental servant who is fixed in either happiness or distress. You have told us how in this material world there is danger at every step. And unless we take full shelter of you, our lives will be a failure. The question is not, where were you, but where were we? How are we using our free will? My Lord, in seeing how often we abuse our free will, I am today saying, be gone, free will. I beg you, force me fully to serve you properly before it's too late. Now I understand, Lord, you were always there and available. Only we are lacking. And that ends the meditation from Bhakti Tirtha Swami. The beggar, 1. All right, I was guided to do that, and I appreciate your listening. Tonight we're going to continue with Spiritual Warrior 6. I don't know how many were here last week, but I tell you the truth, when I got finished and I came back, I kept feeling, wow, he gave us so much. That was so much. And if you've been with me a while, you know every now and then I like to do a review before I go on to the next. And it's interesting, the next chapter 2 is called Why Do We Suffer? And he talks about the question of suffering. But let's see what we can pull out from last week's class. Now, he states in the very beginning that he wants himself to address to us the phenomenon of evil. And why is that? Because, he says, if we address that, then we can understand more about the phenomenon of goodness, righteousness, and humility and divinity by recognizing the opposite. It's like, know your enemy. I think he gave the example of the soldier on the battlefield. He's got to know the soldier, the enemy, so if he's coming at him, he can recognize him. So if we understand this, then we will recognize how evil creeps in and contaminates our consciousness, especially in this world today. But he reminds us first that the propensity of evil is within us. If you recall, if you've been studying these Vedic scriptures, you know there was a time when evil and righteousness could not coexist within the same universe. There was a time, such a time as that. But what happened? As humankind moved further away from the original spiritual culture created by God, and what they do, they move closer to materialism, then evil and righteousness began to coexist powerfully, even within the same individual. It may have taken thousands and thousands of years, but that happened. So what does that mean? It means that there's a demonic and godly side to each of us at this state of our evolution. He reminds us that even what he calls disembodied thoughts, forms, can enter into a person's consciousness and influence him or her, because thoughts are a source of energy and they can impact the environment, and they especially influence people who are receptive. And that's why we've gone through, following these books and the qualities, sense control and mastery of the mind. To begin with, we have to be, and mindfulness of what's going on, so we won't be receptive to these things coming in. Then I guess that's where that expression, the devil made me do it, when somebody did something, you say, why would you do such a thing? But now we're spiritual warriors here, and we're studying spiritual warriorship, and many of you are reading Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, and you're getting a sense of spiritual strength. Because the author reminds us that as we build our spiritual strength, and we've been through this in our study, how do we do that? Anybody remember? Oh, look at all the hands. Yeah, by associating with spiritual people, people of a same mindset, of a higher level, wanting a higher consciousness, by hearing about God, talking about Him, and chanting and meditation, many, many ways we've discussed of how we can build our spiritual strength. So as we build that spiritual strength, and then we understand our real identity. And what is that? Who are we really? And we've also touched on that with these studies. We're spirit souls, eternal beings, part and parcel of the Supreme. So as you build your spiritual strength, and as you understand more and more who you really are, your true identity, we then have greater protection from negative influences. Doesn't that make sense? Because then your mindset is on a higher level, and you're interacting with people of that higher level, and you're connecting, knowing who you are and connecting with the Lord through service is definitely a protection. But how do we recognize destructive behavior? He tells us that if an activity or behavior is righteous, it will produce what? More righteousness. And if it's wicked or evil, what will it do? Produce degradation, especially if the majority follow it. So that's straight common sense. Healthy ancient cultures, though, addressed deviation. How did they do that? You read and you study. They did it by punishment, and they would shame the deviants out of the community. And I'm sure it wasn't that many in one or two, because the demonic and higher is within us. But once you see somebody being punished, you know you don't want to do that thing that they're being punished for. But the difference is, now that was in ancient cultures, healthy ancient cultures. But nowadays, practically the most successful are duplicitous and manipulative. And people, the young people I know, when the drug dealers were out in their big cars and fancy dress and all, young people wanted that and they wanted to go for that. So what happened though in our communities, especially when people decide they will not accept this kind of cultural expression, the deviants will lose their ability to function in the community. But we have to make that decision, and again, have built our spiritual strength and be ready to step out fearlessly. So what happens, he states though, that once you decide not to accept that kind of behavior and you allow, they leave, then you invoke a culture of love. Love your neighbor as yourself. Caring for others, a culture of love. And that's the culture in which we have an actual future. He reminds us that our current society lacks a healthy culture. But really, what is real culture? I'm asking these questions. I can hear your answers, huh? An expression of humankind's pursuit for higher goals. Shoot for the highest goal. Go for the highest goal. But it's also the activities that we engage in during the pursuit for that goal, which goes back to building your spiritual strength. It's all integrated there. Your association, you're associating with other spiritually minded people, if you're reading the scriptures, if you're chanting and meditating on the Lord, this is a culture, a real culture. But what has happened to us? Today, as he says nowadays, we have forgotten how to respect parents and the elders. We've lost our fear and reverence for God. If we develop a healthy culture, how does that help us? How does a wholesome culture help us? It helps us express our personalities and individual creativity to our highest potential. Because our focus is on the highest and the best. And we've invoked love, and we're caring for each other, and we're talking about God. And still, as we just read in this meditation, we're in the material world. There's still going to be some deviation and disasters. So how do we access a healthy culture? Through spirituality. And what does spirituality do? It brings out more of the natural quality of the soul. The soul being eternal and the soul being a part and parcel of the Lord. So we need a healthy culture. He reminds us that spiritual warfare is a science. It's a science of creating and invoking auspiciousness, the best and the highest. Anyone involved in spiritual warriorship understands that it's not just a matter of what you do, but it is also a matter of being sensitive to others' needs, perception, and activities. We've discussed spiritual warriorship quite a bit. So now, if that's not happening, what do we need? We need to develop inner strength. Remember, he told us we have to look within ourselves. We have to look at our own consciousness. Because the greatest problems are problems we have to deal with inside ourselves. And what does that mean? It then means that we have to raise our consciousness. And again, how do we do that? We've just stated it at least twice or three times. Gaining spiritual strength. Developing inner strength. And it means, as we've said before, the company you keep, the scriptures, what you're reading, what you're talking. He even mentioned, if you recall last week, about how the media can bring in these subtle evil thoughts and whatever is going on out there. But if we stay connected in our spirituality as spiritual warriors on the battlefield of consciousness with love, the weapons of love and compassion, then we will be developing inner strength and a healthy culture in our communities. And it can make a difference. Looking at our own consciousness. We have to have determination. Remember the path of the spiritual warrior. One has to be determined and courageous. So he's telling us that we can combat evil with love and righteousness. He states, love extinguishes evil. If we have sufficient love, we will have sufficient protection. Now, he's not talking about the lusty drama that you see on the soap operas, or I guess in the movies. But love, he reminds us, is the greatest weapon that we can ever have. Remember when we studied Spiritual Warrior 2, The School of Love? I went back to that because my mind, memory, I can't hold everything, and I want to bring it back, and just showing a correlation of these Spiritual Warriors series. If we're studying them, imbibing what we're getting, applying it in our lives, and then our lives will be changing, our consciousness will be raising. But remember, the School of Love, I gotta read this to you again. I had to go back to it because I guess I could just tell you what he said, that the soul is made for love. But let's hear it again, because you may have forgotten, you've been so busy with all that's going on, or you may be new. But the School of Love, life is a school of love. In this school, we are not just hungry, but starving for love. And he mentions how starvation is a life-threatening thing. And just think of the difficulty involved in trying to live a so-called normal life if you don't have food, water, and proper shelter. It is very difficult. If we take this reflection a step further, we realize that our real nourishment and shelter is love, because the soul is made for love. The soul within all of us is made for love. Ultimately, life is about spiritual expressions, which involve completeness, knowledge, and happiness. And he says these spiritual expressions will manifest as we recognize our eternal nature. We are eternal beings, which means we're not meant to have temporary experiences. Now, that's enough for the school of love. But remember that? And remember we did a whole chapter on what is love. He breaks it down. So I bring that, so if you're just hearing this and you're hearing, we're talking about evil and all that that's going on, and then we're saying that love extinguishes evil, it's the knowledge that we have of who we are as he states, eternal beings, and as that soul we're made for love. So if we're made for love, there's no problem giving love. So real power comes from love and wisdom, not from data and information processing. So Bhaktivedanta Swami encourages us to pursue more wholesome cultural investigations as we go deeper into philosophy, religion, and spirituality. I'm sure all of you out there are involved in some of that somewhere. But let us get involved in higher consciousness as we move on and march as spiritual warriors. Spiritual warriorship. That's why you're here and you're getting it. Because spiritual warriors are committed to producing a better planet. And if we maintain weapons of love and compassion, evil will be disappointed at every turn. Now I hope that makes sense. I hope if you were here last week, or if you made notes, or if you discussed this, that has brought it back to your attention or clarified. So what we're going to do with the time left, we're going to chapter 2 in Spiritual Warrior 6. And he says the question of suffering. Coming to the platform of love of God is a process. And the Lord has no favorites. And he tells us in the Bhagavad Gita, I envy no one, nor am I partial to anyone. I am equal to all. But whoever renders service unto me in devotion is a friend, is in me, and I'm also a friend to him. That's Bhagavad Gita 9:20. Just as the Supreme Lord is equal to all, the different agents of the Lord are also kind and equal to everyone. At the same time, when we see and experience so much suffering in the world, we may wonder about the nature of God's kindness and doubt the kindness of his representatives. Why does Krishna, or God, who is controlling everything, allow his topmost servants to undergo so many hardships? inconveniences and attacks. After all, if a Vaishnava or a servant of God must undergo excessive suffering, why should people even serve the Lord? In fact, we sometimes see that those who worship demigods experience more material prosperity and less suffering than the devotee of the Supreme Lord. We may begin to think, why should I go through all of these austerities just to suffer intensely as a servant of God? We should really think about this topic from time to time. Otherwise, when we go through difficulties without understanding their deeper purpose, we can lose faith and decide to renounce the service of God. We might then resort to temporary and unhealthy shelters. We might even feel that the price we have to pay to reach the goal is not worth the ultimate result. And this is what is so amazing, for me, or wonderful about Bhaktivedanta Swami. He puts subject matter right in your face. And he tells you, think about it. Because these questions he's asking, we've all had them. And I imagine the people now who are going through this devastation who prayed and went to churches questioning more. But he's saying we have to think about the topic and discuss it so we can understand the deeper purpose. Okay? So the next section he's calling Suffering Has a Reason. The Bhagavad Gita explains that this material world is in fact very difficult to overcome and full of misery. But the Lord can help us if we surrender to His help. He gives us Bhagavad Gita 8:16. From the highest planet in the material world down to the lowest, all are places of misery, wherein repeated birth and death take place. But one who attains to my abode, O son of Kunti, never takes birth again. Basically, the author is saying we want to make the best of a bad bargain by using every situation for our growth. Using every situation for our growth, our spiritual growth. Now, if you've been attending these classes, you've heard that before, I'm sure. Of course, in spite of our endeavor to serve the Lord, we must still deal with the material energy. Nevertheless, we can eventually transcend the misery. Nevertheless, we can eventually transcend the misery. And when I read that, what went through my head was patience. Patience. We're in a process. Patience. Don't give up. What's that? Don't give up the ship. Don't give up your meditation. Don't give up your spiritual path if it's a bona fide one. Since our material bodies are not yet fully spiritualized, we carry particular burdens and karma. Sometimes, due to different types of karma, we experience suffering. We might have karmic reactions chasing us that will later cause some disturbances, even if we have given up our previous sinful activity and now follow a religious lifestyle. I repeat that. We might have karmic reactions chasing us that will later cause some disturbances, even if we have given up our previous sinful activities and now follow a religious lifestyle. I know early in my beginning study we used to hear about this karma and, what goes around comes around. Got to pay the piper, those things. But I used to hear stories that this, for a devotee who is chanting and whatever, he still has to get that karmic, but he may cut his finger instead of losing a finger, So we're going to get it, but it may be easier for a devotee. But he's telling us right now that if it's chasing us, it'll cause some disturbance. I like the way, some disturbance. Even if you have stopped your previous activities. Suffering also develops from aparadhs or offenses. We might be engaged in devotional activities, but due to some improper activities such as offenses to the devotees, Vaishnava aparadh, to the spiritual teacher, Guru aparadh, to holy places, Dham aparadh, while chanting the holy name of God, Nam aparadh, or during service, Seva aparadh, we might suffer from imbalances and stagnations that can cause intense suffering. Therefore, when we are suffering, we can look to see if perhaps we have committed offenses, or whether it stems from a natural source, a natural process of spiritual maturation. This material world is full of misery. And again, my mind goes back to one of our earlier classes. Again, can't remember exact, but I remember stating, based on what he had given us, that it's not about pointing fingers. He did it, it's your fault, it's mine. We have to look at ourselves. We just went through that, of being able to go within ourselves and strengthen ourselves from within. So he says, when we are suffering, we can look to see if perhaps we've committed offenses. And that means being honest with yourself and knowing what's going on and not making excuses. We can look if perhaps we have committed offenses or whether it stems from natural process of spiritual maturation. And that means you're growing spiritually, but you have to burn up that karma that you brought with you. Most importantly, the difficulties do not always have to have a negative effect. The challenges on the spiritual path can function as catalysts to help us increase our meditation on Krishna or God. I remember when I was going through some challenges in my earlier days, still going through some, but I remember at some point I started asking myself when it happened, what in me brought this about? It's a good question to ask when you think somebody said something to you or did something to you that you feel wasn't quite right, and it may not have been quite right, but that's a good place to start. You can think of that. As we struggle and suffer, we especially want to use the suffering as a means for growth and purification. Are you ready for that? Again, what comes to mind is the question, what does your spiritual life mean to you? Good question to ask yourself. Because if it's the most important thing in your life, and you've been studying and you're reading, and some things you might not have grasped, but it's come up and you've heard it in the Bible. When we struggle and suffer, then we can use it as a means for growth and purification. He goes on, sometimes a devotee will suffer because the Lord is giving them mercy. They might have to go through specific challenges that God sends in rapid succession so that they can overcome an obstacle and move on. Again, I remember when I was doing, I think it's Spiritual Warrior 3, and the chapter has to do with strengthening ourselves or something like that. But the line I remember, that spiritual life is challenging and that we will get tests, and he stated that the challenges are qualifying tests to see if we are serious about going back to Godhead. Qualifying you. If that is your objective and your goal this lifetime in your spiritual life, you're going to have it. But he's trying to help us understand the purpose behind it and how to look at it. There are times in people's lives when they just have a series of difficulties. Sound familiar? Actually, we can see it as a special blessing when the Supreme Lord sends so many tests. A special blessing, dear ones. He sees our sincerity in wanting to move faster toward the goal. Therefore, he arranges events that can help us burn up negative karma from the past and move forward faster. How many of you are looking at some of your suffering and difficulties, saying, I hope you're saying, oh, that's what's going on. Let's hear that again. There are times in people's lives when they just have a series of difficulties. Actually, we can see it as a special blessing when the Supreme Lord sends so many tests. He sees our sincerity in wanting to move faster toward the goal. Therefore, He arranges events that can help us burn up negative karma from the past and move forward faster. Sometimes we are acting properly, and it is this proper activity that is creating some of the challenges. It might appear to be suffering, but the Lord is letting it come upon us so that we can once and for all put it behind us. Sometimes the difficulty allows us to shine even more. Have you thought that when this is coming to me, it says it might appear to be suffering, but the Lord is letting it come upon us so that we can once and for all put it behind us. Have you ever thought of that during a difficult time or suffering time? That you're finishing up with that particular karma or whatever you're going through. And that you'll be finished with it as you go through it and put it behind you. Think of that. Because sometimes we just hold on, what is just going on? Why am I doing that? But to accept it as a blessing and know you're finishing up with that. And if you're finished with that, you can start moving ahead. And then something else will come, but you can, isn't that wonderful? No one has to undergo as many challenges and so-called setbacks as the pure representatives of the Lord, because their entire existence is anti-material. They go against the current of material energy. For instance, Haridas Thakur, a great devotee of the Lord in Vaishnav history, was flogged in many marketplaces by government officials who could not tolerate his intense devotional practices. However, he literally felt ecstasy during the incident due to his love of God. In spite of the physical torture, he did not feel the pain. There are times when great devotees of the Lord experience what might seem to be problems, but due to their absorption in love of God, they are happy to make sacrifices on behalf of the Lord. An event that would have an ordinary person suffering and pain stimulates their consciousness and causes them to experience great expressions of love and devotion. And I'm going to end there tonight. I think we've had been given quite a bit. This is quite a chapter, huh? Why do we suffer? So I feel you've gotten quite a bit to think about it, especially if you feel at this present time you're going through difficulties. I'm also sure, though, if you stop and look back at some difficulties you may have gone through or have come up for you and some suffering you felt, and that you passed through it now, that you can maybe look back and see the blessing in it and how it has helped you to move ahead spiritually. So I'll ask, are there any questions, comments on tonight's class discussion? Spiritual warriors out there.
Bhuvan Mohan Das asks, so if my life is full of suffering, does that mean I've arrived?
It means you're still being tested, and it could be that you've arrived because it depends on how you're accepting them. We just read how Haridas Thakur, I guess you could say he had arrived, chanting all the time, and was beaten in the marketplace. He didn't even feel it. He just kept chanting. So yes, my dear, you could have arrived. But if you're seeing it still as suffering, then you may have a little ways to go yet. If you are accepting it in ecstasy, what was that last thing he said? An ordinary person, an event that would give an ordinary person suffering and pain stimulates their consciousness. These are the acharyas and representative, and causes them to experience great expressions of love and devotion. If you're having that, my dear, you've arrived. Now come touch your lotus feet. How's that?
Bhakti Jennifer says, Mother, that was a wonderful class. It is comforting to hear those explanations of suffering.
Jennifer, good you're there. I'm glad you're there.
Bhuvan Mohan says, excellent class, Mother and Johnny. Thank you very much. And I know I have a great way to go yet.
But you're serving so nicely with your discussion groups and reading of Bhagavad Gita. That's all the preparation. And that's pleasing Krishna. So you're well on your way, my dear. You may just be there. Anybody else? Who's there tonight?
Bhakti and Jennifer, Carol and Bliss.
Carol and Bliss?
Mm-hmm.
Is that one name or A-N-D and Bliss?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Haribol.
Manjesh Bhuvan Mohan.
Oh, Manjesh is there. Welcome. Haven't heard from you in a while.
That's it.
That's it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you for being there, and have a wonderful week. Check out your pain and suffering. And see it as a blessing, and know that you're being tested to see if you're serious. Are you serious about your spiritual life? And it'll just move your head, and you will have pleasant moments too. Because the expression goes, the Lord doesn't give us more than we can bear. All right. Thank you, spiritual warriors, for being there. Have a wonderful week, and I'll look forward for us meeting to continue this wonderful subject matter. Hare Krishna.